Gentaro Miura's Berserk is another masterpiece among the vast sea of manga in our history. Having experienced the journey of this manga throughout this month, I was shocked again and again by Miura's brilliant writing, storytelling, world building, paneling, composition, and all-around attention to detail in his art and his characters. Having finally made it to the present chapter 376, which was produced by his friend Koji Mori due to Miura's departure from this world 3 years ago, I was excited to see how this excellent story had been executed on the big screen, or on the CRTV to be more specific. The story has lasted since 1989. Berserk 97, which we call it that because it was made in 1997, was produced by OLM, a film and animation studio. And in modern times, they're known for producing a various amount of Pokemon films and series, so they have some credibility when it comes to producing digestible content. And let me tell you, that is exactly what Berserk 1997 is. Susumu Hirasawa, sorry, I am really bad at pronouncing Japanese names, composed a beautiful soundtrack for the show, and it adds to the emotional tale that is the Golden Age arc. From the fantastic voice acting.
You are certainly brave, but I believe you purposefully put your life in danger and seek the meaning of your existence by battling to preserve it. I find you much to my liking.
When it comes to pacing Miura's story in the picture, it's all done in beautiful fashion. As much as I love this adaptation, sadly that isn't a topic for today, as when this series ended with its 25 episode run, the studio had nothing to do with Berserk ever again. This was simply due to the fact that when they came to the end of the most important arc in the series, there wasn't much more content to cover in the manga beyond this arc. So they'd have to wait years for more content to cover for another 25 or even 12 episodes. And so we waited, and waited, and at last, in 2016, our wait was over. Was over, but our cries were heard because this adaptation is god-awful. The defender of CGI in anime, and more on that later. The show absolutely burns my eyes to look at. I was planning to watch all the series to give it a fair shot, but after only 5 episodes, dear god, I couldn't. Not only is the show a genuine eyesore, but the pacing is so horrible. The best part of Berserk is Miura knows how long scenes should last. Not a single scene or arc to me in Berserk lasts for too long or too short. But oh my, in the 5 episodes I watched, I was half asleep because it is so boring. With multiple scenes that added to the story being cut and replaced for odder ones, let's just say that. For this review, we'll go over the first episode and then dig into the artistic direction for the show. Let me put on my story narration voice. We open up to the aftermath of the eclipse. One thing I can enjoy about the show, if we wait for an anime this long, they'd more than likely for an anime this long, they'd more than likely assume you consume past material, and you want to get right into the place we left off. It then shows Farnus' knights reacting to this, explaining how it was foretold in Revelations. And then we cut to... Wait, Shikre? This is a character we don't even find out until way after this arc. Why throw in the scene of her if you aren't even gonna make it to her arc in this season? Yes, the show somehow got a second season. Anyway, she talks about these revelations about this 5th angel being the Hawk of Darkness and how it'll usher in an age of darkness.
The angel is the Hawk of Darkness. He will usher in an age of darkness.
Obviously talking about Griffith in his position now as the 5th member of the God Hand. We then cut to a very awesome looking shot of Guts, like,
oh my god, he's an alpha male. Look at that Sigma little dainty walk.
Before cutting to the opening. If there's one thing the show has, this intro is very awesome looking besides the CGI bits at the end. This song is really epic fitting for the rest of Berserk as most of the traumatic scenes are over. Now this is where things start to get messy. In the original 1997 anime, it does cover the few chapters before the Golden Age arc, but they don't even get to the point where they introduce Puck. They never even meet the Count. Guts just magically had the Baylet. So the anime has a lot to cover, right? Right? Nah, let's just rewrite the 1997 bar scene and add Aistra for some reason. This would not be a video essay of mine if I didn't mess up a lot in the recording, and I know that's not how you say his name, but his name comes from like Greek and Spanish origins. Do not expect some English bloke like me to understand how to say it. And then continue where the manga would, with Guts running off to do Guts stuff, Puck following him. They join this old man and his daughter in a carriage before, uh-oh, Guts is having a nightmare, guys. Scratch that, he's awake, and his little spirit was sucking off his life force. Uh-oh, spooky spirits. Guts, you know what to do. Actually, scratch that, the daughter's dead. And they're skeletons now. That's nice. They totally don't look like they hopped out of a point-and-click game from the 90s. Anyway, Guts kills them in a really cool way, guys. Trust me, when he hits them with his sword, it doesn't sound like a pan being smashed against your skull. And that's the end of episode 1. There's a lot to talk about. For starters, they really don't help us in establishing a timeline here, and I'm going to make a clear distinction that a long time has passed since the eclipse that wiped out the clan of the Hawk. They even touch base on Guts and Casca after the eclipse, and how Guts decides to venture out on his own. But now we're just to assume that this could literally be the day after, and Guts suddenly doesn't care that his comrades are all dead and his partner is tortured beyond belief. So they tie this beginning chapter in the manga straight to the arc, which is 16 volumes later. Not to mention completely skipping the Lost Children arc, which helps distinguish Guts' character and his motives, with it being his first adventure since the eclipse. I cannot imagine being an anime only and seeing this first episode of the anime. I'd be in complete confusion. It's like if you ended Dragon Ball and then went straight to the Frieza saga. Like, was the Saiyan saga major? Not really, but it helps expand how Goku's been doing for the past couple of years since Dragon Ball ended, and how the power system and characters have changed. It's an absolute mess, and I cannot imagine how much they mess up the continuing story that I will not bear to watch. Anyway, let's get into how trash this show looks. Before I start, let me say I mean no disrespect to the directors and any animator who worked on the show. They must have tried their best, and with how awful the animation industry is in Japan, I hope they got paid well even if the show is mediocre at best. For starters, why is this show primarily CGI? Ryo Kurosu, the producer for this adaptation, says, "For this series, we're trying to do something new." The director is a 2D animator, so what goes on in his mind and what he puts on the storyboards is all 2D. From there, it's about choosing which tool to use between CG animation and traditional 2D, or a hybrid of the two. The director of the 2D and 3D studios will meet and discuss what to use when depending upon what we're trying to accomplish with each scene. That makes sense. Why would they choose a 2D director for a 3D adaptation? And meeting up with 2 studios to talk about which style you'll choose for each scene seems to overcomplicate it too much, because most of the scenes are 3D, and these 2D shots are only that. They're merely shots, so they stand out so badly against the 3D animation. It's like a constant jabbing reminder of, you could have had this, but, you know, it makes it all worse. Would I say the downfall of this show is that it's CGI? Not at all. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm a huge defender of CGI in animation. Mappa's Chainsaw Man is a beautiful representation of how to perfectly mix the two mediums into an absolute work of art. Orange Studios Beastars is a perfect example of a primarily CGI show, with only background characters being the only 2D animation, and the show is absolutely beautiful and one of my favorites. Even the Evangelion rebuilds use CGI for some of the mecha fights. Although I will note, in the first 2 rebuilds, it isn't the best, but in the 4th one, they absolutely killed it, showing that yes, CGI is a medium that isn't just for an easy budget cut. If you want it to look good, you have to work with it as hard as you would with 2D animation, so this whole series comes down to just god-awful directing. Next point, these models are absolutely atrocious. CGI as a medium, if you're going with a 2D animation look, you have to realize that means not just using your model as you would in any 3D animated movie. What I mean by this is making the model work only for the camera view, as to give your character more exaggerated movements that look fluid on camera. So along with them never using this rule of thumb, and these models looking atrocious, it just mixes up a lot of pure ugliness. Another point is these sketch lines that are on every model. I don't know if they just threw this in substance paint on every model and called it a day, but it looks god awful and it doesn't even make it seem any more 2D. Another point is that the animation is just bad. The best way I could explain it is that they animated it like they still have the limitations of time that come with 2D animation. There's so many times where the movement is so limited and it's like, dude, just move the mouse to move the model. You aren't drawing a whole new frame. The movements are so unbelievably stiff, and the armor isn't an excuse, because even characters without it move just as stiff. To praise Beastars once again, look at this scene where Legoshi is talking to Louis. Instead of him just standing there flapping his gums like Guts does in countless scenes, he moves his hands showing his fidgety side and giving more personality and not a blank slate just blabbing off. This shows a clear difference in the direction the animator was given for this scene, which is just brilliant character acting. And yes, I know Guts isn't exactly the fidgety type like Legoshi, but god, can Guts just move an inch? He looks like a wax figure most of the time. In conclusion, this adaptation is a dud, and if your children ever complain about their favorite piece of media being absolutely butchered, you can just show them the series and say, "Oh child, you ain't seen nothing yet."